Welcome back to another edition of Crash. Are you ready? This is your host, George Whitehurst Berry, and today we are pleased to welcome back a regular guest on our program, Byron Dale, and we're in the process of getting a hold of Byron right now, and we will we'll be discussing with Byron his new projects. His website, for those of you listeners who are new listeners who have not been to his website before, is wealthmoney.org. That's wealthmoney.org. Byron, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, and great to be with you, George.
Okay. All right. You had mentioned some work. We have talked extensively about different ways of getting money into circulation, which is not created out of nothing by international banksters and then borrowed into circulation with a debt attached. What is the latest on the home front where you are?
Well, we're working on it pretty hard. We've got a guy running for governor up here and a lieutenant governor that's a close friend of mine that really understands this stuff, and we're making headway. In fact, they're starting to get people. You're in Minnesota.
Minnesota, okay.
Yeah, in fact, some of the guys are starting to call and say that they switched over from the more popular Republican candidate to the guy that's running. He's also running a Republican. There'll be a primary. But they're finally starting to understand that you just can't keep on getting deeper and deeper in debt and raising taxes more and spending more. And you can't cut a lot of these things until you get some way for them people to go into the private sector and get a job.
Well, that's obviously, those of you who are new listeners, Byron has had years of experience of dealing with these international banksters. In fact, he wrote years ago a book called Bashed by the Bankers. Could you tell our listeners how to get a hold of that book and the other excellent books you have on the money system?
Yes, the best way to do it is just go to the website wealthmoney.org, and that's simply just think of money as wealth, money.org. And the books are all listed there. You can see, I think I've written 4 books. The latest one is Modern Money Secrets. It's a lot more comprehensive. It gets into a lot more detail of the history and then more of the solution. And, there is a solution, but the solution is we've got to quit thinking the way we always thought, that you can just continually borrow money from the bankers and never have consequences. And we're starting to see the consequences now, because not only is the United States and the states in the United States, but also foreign countries are all on the brink of bankruptcy now. If you think about that, that is just so totally illogically, because all we do as people is produce new wealth, and everything that I know, every living thing tries to reproduce itself and make more of itself constantly. So this whole concept that we're running out of resources and we just can't do anything, and we've got to borrow money from bankers that create it as a promise to pay, that they promise to pay you that never do, but you have to borrow their promise to pay and pay them interest on it, and that's a direct quote from the Library of Congress. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is the absolutely upside down thing about it. What it should be a liability is able to be counted by them as an asset. So their promise to pay, you end up paying for plus interest.
Yes.
You end up paying for, and your assets, your production end up as a surety for their debt, their promise to pay.
Yeah, and it actually ends up after a while as their total ownership, because when you do this, it's impossible for everybody to pay back more than they borrowed. It's physically and monetarily and everything else impossible if they can't create more of their same. And, of course, money is a sterile thing. It can't reproduce itself. It can only be produced again by a banker when he makes a loan. So there is no way in this system to put money in to pay the interest without increasing the debt principal. So somebody always has to lose out in the game, and that means the bankers get to take ownership of that stuff at basically nothing, and they get everything for free, and everybody else has to work and produce to have things, and nobody can compete against that system. It's got to be stopped. It just can't work. It's a non-sustainable system.
Yeah, why should we trade our goods and services, our production, for their bookkeeping entries. I mean, that's utterly insane.
Well, as you say so many times, George, what we do is the producers fund and support the non-producers, and the non-producers get the most of the benefit, and most of the benefit is lost by the actual producers. And that, again, is incomprehensible that people would allow that to happen, and that only proves it's because they have been so lied to by the college and most of the economics teachers, because they will not tell it the way it really is. And I can show you that. I'm getting writings all the time now, and I've been studying it, and it's so clear they're either don't understand the system themselves, or they're purposely trying to deceive the reader.
Well, now, you gave a famous example. Could you tell our listeners about that example where you really upset a lot of people with the mathematics of the debt money parasitic paradigm?
Well, I guess I'm not thinking exactly what you're thinking about, but there's so many instances.
You met with a group of bankers and others, and did some simple math with them.
Well, the one thing that was to come the closest of anything that I've done that was so obvious, I was talking to, this is may not be what you're looking for, but it's another one of my experiences. I was talking to a lawyer in Nebraska, and he was telling me, well, I didn't understand this, and he brought up a couple of points, and that was years ago, and I hadn't thought about it, that particular point. So I said, well, here, let's actually sit down here and take some paper clips and some different things so we can actually move them around, because I'm not sure I understand what you're trying to say to me, and I don't know the answer, so let's really look at this. And so as you explain it to him, let's move something on the table so we can actually follow it physically with our eyes and our mind and see what the results are. And so we did, and all of a sudden he saw everything he said was untrue, and he said, and wouldn't work, and he said, oh my God, this is the most terrible system anybody could imagine. But see, he thought he understood it, but he'd never sat down and actually tried to work it out where your mind and your eyes and everything could follow everything. Because don't fool yourself. You can fool the mind.
All right, we'll be back right after the break with Byron Dale. All right, we're back with our special guest, Byron Dale, and again, Byron's website is wealthmoney.org. There is a lot of good information there and books that you can order, and they should be on the library shelves of everyone's Truth and Money series. Those books are from actual experience and from having written officials in the Treasury Department, from years of research. Byron Dale's books are an excellent antidote to the disinformation circulating in the patriotic community about the Rothschild gold standard, about the jumbled up truths mixed with misunderstandings that frequent the patriotic community about the money system. In no area in the patriotic community is there more confusion. And speaking of confusion, we did a dissection in our recent lecture about Mr. Bankster Alan Greenspan. We have this statement by Greenspan: the financial policy of the welfare state requires there be no way for owners of wealth to protect themselves. Well, again, he starts out by pointing the finger at the government, whereas the financial policy, when you have a private central bank, is dictated not by the government but by the banksters. Byron?
That's absolutely true. And I want to get back a little bit, because there was another incident that I had that it was very informative. I was sitting in the Federal Reserve boardroom in Washington, D.C., talking with Robert Ewald, flow of direct funds of the Federal Reserve Board, and other people that work for the Fed. And they was explaining this. We happened to be able to join a group of Japanese business students that was visiting the Fed and having this sitting there too, and it was all talking and around the table and asking questions, and they was telling us how this money kept expanding out of this pool, but they never explained where the pool was. So finally I said, well, I'm not sure I understand this, so let me understand this. We start out with a pool, and then they never will talk about what the pool is or where it comes from. And I said, now the money expands out of that. And he said, that's right. And I said, well, let's take this napkin holder here that's full of napkins in front of me, and we'll call that the pool. Is that okay? And he said, yes. And so I said, okay, now we expand the money out here by making loans, and loans at interest. Isn't that true? And he said, yes. So I loaned 3 people on each side of me a napkin. And I said, now, when the interest comes due, you have to pay this back plus the interest. And he said, yes. And so I said, okay, everybody give me 2 napkins back now.
Yeah.
And of course, it won't work. So one of the other guys that worked for the Fed said,
let's say, Byron, let's say they were not napkins. Let's say they were gold coins. Would the same principle apply?
Well, of course it would if you didn't have another gold mine. I mean, it doesn't make any difference unless you can reproduce your own. You can't give back more than you borrowed from somebody else. I mean, if they're their only, and of course that's the thing with money, they've got it, so they're the only producer.
Exactly, and again, even the word producer, they're just making bookkeeping entries. So
well, yeah, I mean they're only producing a promise to pay that they never have to pay, and I know that for a fact too because I sued the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis for payment on their notes. It said right on their face they would pay me X number of dollars on demand. And so I demanded them, and they said, well, we don't have to pay. If you want something physical, anything else but what we give you, just go down to any store, and they'll take it, and they'll give you whatever you want for it. But we, the one who issued the note, the promise to pay, we don't have to pay you.
Well, then it's not a note, is it?
Well, no, and of course, then if you watch the actual bills, and you can see all this on my website, that they actually changed the bills. They used to say, we'll read to the they will set on their face, well, pay to the bearer on demand. Now that's been taken off, and they don't. They just said this note is legal tender.
Well, and they used to say, and is redeemable in lawful money, ...
Yes.
Whereas now they've taken the redeemable in lawful money, and there's an open admission on the face of the older Federal Reserve notes that the Federal Reserve notes were not lawful money, that they were redeemable in lawful money. Here's the other portion of Greenspan's statement. He says, deficit spending is simply a scheme for the hidden confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. Well, here again, he's referring to the financial policy of the welfare state as generating deficit spending. No mention of the parasitic user who's creating money out of nothing with a debt attached, which makes deficit spending an absolute certainty. There's no way to avoid deficit spending when you have more debt than you do money supply. Is there?
They also, everybody says you're living beyond your means, and of course that's another stuff, a bullshit word out there, because if you have to borrow to have any medium exchange, you automatically have to live beyond your means because you have to borrow to get it. It didn't go into circulation any other way. And if people won't address this, they will never straighten out anything in America until they understand and start straightening out this money system so it works for the benefit of the people instead of just the benefit of the top bankers. Now, let me continue back with what went on in the Federal Reserve Board room. And so this other guy working for the Fed and said, well, you're not right, because I could borrow the money and build a plane and sell it to Japan, and they'd pay me, and then and the profit, so I could pay back my loan and have some money. And I said, well, yeah, that's true up to a point, but Japan has the exact same kind of money system. You have to borrow all the money there, too. So the only difference is you'd shift the debt to another country instead of to another individual in the United States.
You transfer the debt. You would not. You might pay off your personal debt, but the only way to do that is to take principal plus interest out of circulation, which means you're transferring the debt onto somebody else.
That's right. You have to transfer the debt to somebody else. You cannot. You can give back the principal. Yeah, that's right. You can give back what you borrowed, but you can't give back more than that unless you shift the debt to somebody else, and that debt is nothing but somebody else's borrowed principal, which is also drawing interest, which also makes the debt grow. Interest always makes your debt grow and never makes your money supply grow. And it was an amazing thing because all of a sudden one of the Japanese students in the Federal Reserve Board room there who was having this conversation, all of a sudden he really saw it. And most of the time they don't show any, emotion, but all of a sudden, man, I thought his head was going to come off. It was shaking up and down. All of a sudden, it became very clear to him what he had never understood before, that this is a non-workable system. And, of course, just like that whole meeting was shut down, and them guys left the room in a hurry.
I've had the same reaction from financial planners when we went through the mechanics step by step, and this lady, financial planner, said, "You've blown my mind," because she had never. It was like her whole brain began to short circuit. She had never even thought of it in all the years of training. She suddenly realized, and she did realize it because otherwise she wouldn't have had that reaction.
That's right.
She came to the realization that everything she had been taught for years was GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, founded upon a false premise. We'll be coming up to a break here fairly shortly. But in fact, we're at a break right now, so we'll be back with Byron Dale. All right, we're back with our special guest, Byron Dale, and again, his website is wealthmoney.org. Byron, you've been involved at the state level for some honest money. What is the latest on that, and could you tell our listeners what you've been doing in the state of Minnesota?
Well, what we did in the state of Minnesota, and actually we worked on it first at the federal level, and it became very obvious. It took a ton of money, which I didn't have, to go down to the federal legislature very often and see these guys. And I actually, discovered how to get actual appointments. I wouldn't go down unless I had actual appointments. I had every appointment hour on the hour for 5 days straight, 8 hours a day to talk to these guys, and it was clear none of them had a clue. Well, of course, that takes a lot of funds, and you got to be gone all the time and everything else. And so that's when I got the idea one day that I heard the Senate Transportation Committee talking about we've got to find a different way to fund transportation. We just can't do it the same old way we've always done. We just can't have enough money. And so that's what gave me the idea. So we started working on a concept of how we could do it on the state level. And, of course, this evolved. I mean, I've worked on this now for 15 years at the state level, and it's evolved into a really workable, absolutely sound plan, because first you have to understand the problem is the banks create money as loans. And it really doesn't make so much difference who creates the money. It's the way that money goes into circulation and who gets the benefit and who doesn't. And so working from that premise, I went down and started talking to legislators, and, of course, I got into them and quite easily because I say I had, you asked a new and innovative way to fund transportation, and I have one I'd like to share with you, and let's see if we can't do something with it. And so we've had as high as 15 sponsors on the bill, and it's a very simple bill because the concept is banks create money, so let's just let them create the money, but let's spend the money into circulation for something that benefits everyone, so the workers get the benefit of their own production, and the people who don't work, doing anything real productive, not saying they don't, put in their time, and that's the bankers and the people, the bureaucrats that, just live off of taxes, because they don't produce any of their own income from production. They produce it from, our production. They take our taxes from us, interest or taxes. But so anyway, I said, let's just have them spend it in to build infrastructure, because the United States Constitution clearly says Congress shall coin the money, which they refuse to do, and shall provide for post roads, which they won't do either. And yet it very clearly says in the Constitution that that's two of the things they should do. So it's very simple. If you combine the two, now you can create money and spend it in to give us the transportation system, which we've got to have, because you could do business as barter, but you can't do business if you don't have any transportation system to move the products back and forth. And so we said, okay, let's just have, all we need to do is change a couple of little accounting rules and one state law, and then the banks can actually, the state chartered banks that the states control, and most people don't understand that we have a dual banking system. They only think that we have a Federal Reserve banking system, and that's not true. We have a Federal Reserve banking system that's chartered and controlled by the federal legislature, and we have a state-chartered banking system that's chartered and controlled by state legislature. And so we just go in there and we ask the legislators to pass a simple little bill that would have the states create the money just like they do now as a bookkeeping entry, a checkbook money, only spend it in to pay for the rebuilding and upgrading and building of our renewal of our transportation system. And it'll work like a charm, and everybody knows it'll work. Only we're having problems because the bankers don't want it to work, and they lie. We've had hearings in the House and the Senate in Minnesota, and the bankers testified that, well, even if you pass a law, it wouldn't work because we cannot create any money. All we do is loan the depositors money. And of course, that's an absolute lie. Again,
if they have any kind of fractional reserve mechanics, which they all do, or any multiplier mechanics, how could anybody even make a statement like that with a straight face?
I don't have a clue to that one. Well, now we went on, and now
I think
senator
he probably knows better. I mean, nobody could be that stupid.
Well, I don't know. One of the senators said that, well, his dad had been a banker all his life, and he said banks don't create money, so...
Well, then, if that's the case, then every time they made a loan, they would have to debit some depositor's account to make the loan, which they're not doing.
Well, of course they're not. And even if they did, they still wouldn't create any money because if you loan me your money, there is no increase in the money supply.
Right.
Now, there is an increase in the debt, but there's no increase in the money supply. So even if they did just loan the depositors money, it would be worse than it is today because they would just constantly increase the debt but not increase the money supply at all. So now they wouldn't even have the principal to pay back, much less the interest. So it would even be a worse system than they have when they have where the banks create new money when they make a loan.
If that's possible.
Well, yeah, it is. But, I mean, it's unconceivable. But anyway, now it's proceeded on till now a senator called a meeting, and the Department of Commerce and other places, people showed up with myself and other people, and they give us a beautiful made chart. You know, it wasn't factual, but it was nice, and it showed how they started with $1,000 and went through the multiplier. So my first question, okay, where did the first 1,000 come from? And he said, we absolutely will not address that issue. You just have to accept the fact that the $1,000 is there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wait a minute, how did it get there?
The question was also is, did the $1,000 get there by being borrowed into circulation with a debt attached, or alternatively, was it issued into circulation without a debt attached, without being borrowed into circulation?
Yeah, but he wouldn't touch that question with a 10-foot pole. Well, which you know there's something wrong, because why wouldn't he ask a simple question?
Yeah, why not?
And so I said, okay, let's go ahead and work through your old proposal. And I said, now this looks good and sounds good. And he clearly showed when they got done they had the same amount of reserves they had, but the debt had grown. Of course, and he said the money supply grew, which he admitted that the banks created new money. And I said, well, obviously, why didn't you complete your chart then? Because you went through all the factors, but now how about less adding in the interest debt that's owed now because all these people have borrowed? And he just got red in the face.
Well,
I don't think it ever occurred to him that the interest made the debt grow, that you had to pay back more than you borrowed, but all he'd created in his own chart was just the principal.
Yeah, this is typical of the kind of feedback that you get from In fact, every financial planner that called me after some of my shows on more than one of my shows was very complimentary, which was very pleasant surprise in terms of feedback, because time and time again I would hear from financial planners and they would say, George, before I listened to some of your lectures, I didn't even realize I didn't understand the basics of the money system. So I didn't know what kind of feedback I was going to get, but as of this date, over the last during the last several years, every feedback, response I've gotten has been very positive, which just goes to show that there are a lot of good people out there, well-intentioned, but sometimes they've never thought about it, or they've never been taught it in the brainwashing textbooks known as college economics text and economics.
Well, I think that's true. In fact, I had a niece that got into this. She took a course in economics and began to get into some of this, and the professor told her very clearly, if you want to graduate out of this class, you quit this bullshit. We don't want any more talk like that.
Let's say BS, because instead.
Sorry about that, George.
Yeah, because we are on the air.
I understand. My old farming background, sometimes I get passionate and I forget.
Okay.
But you're right. I mean, it's total nonsense.
Well, let's take a look at how this ties in with the founding of our nation. We're going to go into a break here. In fact, we are going into a break right now, so we'll take this up right after the break with Byron Dale. All right, we're back with Byron Dale. Byron, I ran across an article that was posted on the website of another talk show host, and the title of the article is "The Federalist Papers, Hamilton and the Rothschilds," and then the article says, "One of the most important sets of documents in our nation's history is a group of letters to the editor written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, James Madison, known as the Federalist Papers. The United States had just experienced a weak central government in the form of a loose confederacy, so weak that it exposed the different states to both intrigue and foreign invasion." Then he goes on to say, "In fact, the Whiskey Rebellion, launched by a group of private still owners that had no interest in paying taxes, just showed how vulnerable the new nation was." Well, I would say there was a lot more to the Whiskey Rebellion than just a bunch of owners who had no interest in paying taxes. But be that as it may, he goes on to say, "The fear of a strong central government after fighting a war with King George over unjust laws and taxation was still fresh in the mind of many patriots. The government that governs best governs least was their motto. They found a strong and powerful ally in the governor of New York. The Federalist Papers were directed at New York and other states that resisted the new Constitution. Obviously, they were very effective." I quote from the first of these letters by Alexander Hamilton. Then he quotes a quote by Hamilton where he's arguing for the existence of the Union instead of the individual states. And then he says Hamilton continues by explaining how petty local interests could threaten national ones. And Hamilton says, "Among the most formidable obstacles which the new Constitution will have to encounter may readily be distinguished the most obvious interest of a certain class of men in every state to resist all changes which may hazard a diminution of the power, emolument, and consequence of the offices they hold under the state establishments, ... And then the author of this article goes on to say, "What Hamilton and the other founders feared is that the Union would be replaced by various alliances confederacies by the states. They would then expose the country to foreign powers that understood the advantages of divide and conquer." And then he goes on to say, "There are those who would argue the Constitution was the Rothschild Illuminati creation." Well, that's anyway. Yet, to paraphrase the banker Rothschild, quote, "I care not who makes the laws of a nation as long as I control its money," unquote. The state of New York was run by moneyed interests. They were a threat to the passage of the Constitution. Hamilton, Jay, and Madison effectively neutralized them with the Federalist Papers. As I have stated in previous articles, in exchange for America's independence, Rothschild and his bankster buddies were given a minority interest in the First National Bank. While some look at this as a form of treason, the War of 1812 demonstrated that England could take back its colonies at will. Well, I don't know where he gets that statement from. The last time I checked, Andy Jackson won the battle at New Orleans. But anyway, he goes on to say, "Hamilton was a true patriot, American patriot, albeit a pragmatic one. I am sure most Americans would be happy to have a majority interest in our current Federal Reserve System instead of no ownership, which is what they have now. Well, was Hamilton, when he argued as a solution for strengthening the Union, he argued repeatedly for a private central bank, a national bank. This was quite different from Lincoln's approach to preserving the Union by issuing a sovereign money in the form of Lincoln greenbacks, which did not have to be borrowed into circulation. And I see nothing in this article which distinguishes between arguing for a stronger union and then advocating a solution of a private parasitic debt money system, which is what Hamilton did, Hamilton being a Rothschild agent, and then Lincoln's solution, which was very different, arguing for a sovereign money which did not have to be borrowed into circulation. Byron, this to me shows how jumbled up the perception is in the patriotic community.
Have never really sat down and tried to understand it. They just accepted what they've read in some places like what you just talked about, and never stopped to think it through if any of those things could be true, and if they were even true, what's the consequences of it actually worked that way. And if you do that, you soon come up to different conclusions that these guys come up with. And, basically gold is wealth, but nobody I've ever talked to, and I've challenged everybody that wants that, will tell me exactly where we're going to get it, how much it's going to take, and what we're going to do with it. Are we going to let them put the gold in a vault and issue notes someplace on it that you got to borrow, or just how are we going to do all this? And they don't have a clue because they've never tried to think it through that far.
Well, yeah, and I've given the example, if you want to buy something and you're in California and the thing you want to buy is in Maine, are you physically going to take gold coins over? Obviously, you're not. Every time you want to do a transaction, would you hop aboard a plane and physically take those gold coins? Obviously, you're into some kind of bookkeeping entry system, and then the issue is never addressed that under a Rothschild gold standard, when you borrow money under that system, more debt is created than money supply, whether the money system is quote unquote backed up by gold or not. You end up with the Rothschild boom and bust cycle, the Roaring '20s followed by the Great Depression type cycle, whether you're on a gold system or not. And they don't address these issues. They don't
because they've never thought them through. That's the problem. They've just accepted something. It's like I've been told in my life so many times, I know you can't understand it, you just got to accept it. Well, I'm just not much for that anymore because I've decided that I can understand this stuff if I just study it a little bit. And I won't say that I'm the sharpest guy in the United States, but my gosh, it don't take a lot of smarts to sit down and put something on a desk and move it around so you can physically see what happens. We did this one time, long time ago. I got my kids in, and I said, we want to stop work a little early tonight because I want to play a game. I want to get, everything up here, and we're going to have it just like a little economy, and wife and two sons and another friend of my son was there, and I said, now we're all going to produce things just like we do here, and we're going to trade them with each other, but we're going to have a banker, and my oldest son said, let me be the banker, and so he was the banker, and he loaned us all the money. It didn't, and we just kept moving things around and borrowing actual paper bills, monopoly money from him, and adding the interest and all that. And it didn't take any long time till it was clear to all of them that it was an unworkable system. It couldn't function, except that he'd end up with everything, and we'd do all the work.
Well, from the bankster's point of view, it's functioning extremely well because they're ending up with all the wealth, and the producers are ending up broke. So
yeah, from my son's point of view, it worked well too because he sat there and created the money, and he got all the benefits. He got he owned everything on the table.
Now, you mentioned somebody that you were explaining this to, and instead of saying this is going to destroy my country, this is going to bankrupt my country, this is going to impoverish my friends, my neighbors, people who work for a living, this is going to end up taking their wealth and transferring it to non-producers. You mentioned somebody that said, and I've heard this reaction before, well, well, how do I get in on this legalized theft? I mean, this is utterly insane.
That's exactly. I had a young guy, neighbor, that going to school to be a surgeon. Obviously a bright young man, and he's pretty conservative and all this kind of stuff. And so I explained it all to him, and his first things out of his mouth was, well, how can I get on the side that gets the benefits? And I said, well, the only way you can do that is to go get into the banking system, become one of them that steal from everybody else. Is that what you really want to do? Well, then he didn't like that so well because he considered himself kind of a church-going, moral young man. Yeah, I believe he is, but yet at the same time, his whole mindset is not that. It wasn't how to get the benefit of what I'm doing. When I provide services to other people that need them, it was how do I get in on this scam so I can get the benefit of all this.
Well, again, it's so often it's the first words out of someone's mouth that tells where they're
really coming from.
Yeah, and that's why it's such a tough nut to crack, because you have these people with vested interest, don't you, Byron?
Well, of course you do. And when you start, and it's true when you've got somebody that's making his living off this system as a teacher or teaching this stuff or whatever. Well, wait a minute. Where does their loyalty really lie? With the American people or with what benefits their paycheck?
Yeah, exactly.
And you have to determine this. And my only motivation is not what benefits my paycheck. If I did, I sure wouldn't have done all the things I've done. I can guarantee you that.
All right, we're out of time, unfortunately. But again, Byron's website is wealthmoney.org. Thanks again, Byron.
Thank you, George, and thank you for the opportunity. Talk to you later.
Take care.